The homeless, the unhoused, less charitably, bums, hobos, derelicts. It's a reality of any city, but why has homelessness become such a crisis that now it turns neighbors into enemies and has become a driving story in national media?
Who are these people, these hundreds of thousands of people, and how did they get there, and why, and what are we doing about it? What is this anyway? Huh?
It's an eyesore, not to mention a health hazard.
Apartments look out on the filth, and so does the First Southern Baptist Church.
You can smell it in the air sometimes.
I live here. Me and my neighbors get to stay and sleep safely another night.
The core complement of people who are experiencing homelessness have a common thread in being poor. They're often under or uneducated. They come from populations that we've sort of disenfranchised and stripped of opportunity.
The very nature of homelessness in LA has really radically transformed. Even though there have for many years been tens of thousands of people experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles, over the last 5 years is the first time that homelessness has appeared in wealthier neighborhoods, in neighborhoods where it hasn't before. And that's the reason why it's become such a politically salient issue now.
It's a human rights catastrophe, and it's got to stop, and we have to stop normalizing it.
This is Saving the City, where we talk about how cities figure it out. Today we're looking at Los Angeles, which despite its enormous prosperity is facing perhaps the biggest homelessness crisis in the nation. It's become its poster child. Mike Arnold has been at the front lines of helping the homeless in Los Angeles for decades.
So we have a whole series of public systems that are failing people. A high number of kids who leave the foster care system end up being homeless. A high percentage of people who leave our correctional systems end up being homeless. We have a mental health care system that fails people to leave them on the streets. I mean, our military system takes people, damages them, and then discharges them to the street. And the failures of all of those public systems, I think, are really what is driving homelessness in our respective communities.
Hal Bastian is a real estate consultant and booster for downtown LA.
People vote where they live, right? And very few people used to live in downtown Los Angeles. So we as a matter of public policy, put all of our missions and social services in an area of downtown where there are almost no voters, so you wouldn't get voted out of office. Because almost everybody cares about people living in the streets and mental illness, as long as the solutions are not located within their own neighborhoods.
Let's step back to the birth of California. The Golden State has always been the object of great dreams and great disappointments. City leaders came up with a solution: concentrate public services downtown. Tom Gilmore is a downtown property developer.
At that time, in the 70s, downtown was a pretty dysfunctional place already. It was the place nobody lived, so let's put them all downtown. So they literally created a designated area called Skid Row, which, God bless them, I'm always amazed at the marketing geniuses at City Hall. And next thing you know, we have the greatest concentration of homeless in America in Skid Row.
The homeless population in Los Angeles can be traced back to the late 1800s, beginning with Civil War veterans and itinerant workers going west in search of new opportunities, people who ended up eking out an existence at the end of the rail line.
Los Angeles has a lot of glamour and mystique associated with it. One of the things that I think is a myth is that a lot of people who are homeless in Minnesota come to Los Angeles because the weather is nicer. Now, they may come here because the weather's nicer, but I can almost guarantee they didn't come here when they were homeless. They were already economically fragile. They got here, and when reality set in, it was a very, very short step from, staying with friends who were helping support them to wearing out your welcome and ending up on the streets.
A 50 square block area, today inhabited by nearly 5,000 homeless people in the heart of downtown LA. Thousands of people flooded into Skid Row from all over the county, and it wasn't long before demand outpaced supply. Shelters maxed out, so people began camping on nearby streets, and a whole new set of problems emerged. For context, here are the boundaries of Skid Row, and here's the greater LA area. The 2020 count found over 66,000 homeless people. But that's only a snapshot in time. At least 150,000 people living in LA experience some form of homelessness in any given year. This desperation is something Georgia Berkovich is all too familiar with. She has worked at the Midnight Mission for nearly 2 decades.
So the Midnight Mission has been around since 1914, and we help restore homeless people to self-sufficiency. Our role really is to put ourselves out of business, which we've been trying to do for over 100 years. We have not closed our doors since 1914, since we opened, and we're serving numbers close to 1 million meals a year now, which we haven't seen numbers like that since the Great Depression.
State policies exacerbated the situation. As governor, Ronald Reagan signed the Landrum and Petrus Short Act in 1967. It was a bipartisan bill intended to make institutionalization less draconian while also saving money.
The state decided that they were going to close mental hospitals. The argument was people with mental health deserve a better life than long-term institutionalization. And there were 2 components to the plan. One component was shut down the hospitals. The other component was to build community-based mental health care clinics with housing opportunities so that people would have a place to go and they would be able to receive services to address mental health in their local communities. So they got halfway through it. They shut down the mental hospitals and then left people who were severely mentally ill to fend for themselves. No local government ever stepped up and said we need to be doing something as well.
As president, Reagan slashed federal housing aid and investment.
The people who were sleeping on the grates, the homeless who were homeless, you might say by choice.
A trend that continued under Clinton.
America owes all of us an opportunity if we'll assume responsibility for ourselves, our communities, and our country. No more something for nothing.
But the greatest blow may have been the Great Recession of 2008-2009, especially in cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco. While so many lost their homes, the housing market quickly recovered and started growing again, such that returning to housing was impossible.
The largest number in people experiencing homelessness for the first time is as a result of financial issues. Lack of affordable housing is a huge issue. And we're seeing more families and more women, and the face of homelessness has changed a lot over the years.
We know the stereotypical faces of homelessness, but what often remains invisible are the people who came close to the edge but managed to avoid the streets. Joey Weinert was there before he found the Midnight Mission.
I did what society told me to do, get a job, pay my bills, and I had a vehicle, had the girlfriend, had all those things on the outside. It looked like everything was fine, but I never dealt with what I know now is my alcoholism, this gaping hole in my soul. I wasn't out here on the streets. It's hard for me to really relate to what's going on with people on a daily basis out here, but I get to see it. I get to experience it from a secondhand point of view. And from what I've seen from my experience being here for a few years now is that, again, like I said, there are human beings, there are people out there. There's some fundamentally good people out there that just have kind of slipped through the cracks of society, and they're doing whatever they can to survive.
I was raised by a single mom, and I started drinking with the kids in the neighborhood as a way to escape my home life and the way I was feeling. But the truth of it is I was terrified of being homeless. It was a reality for me. I mean, it was, if my best friend's parents didn't take me in when I hit bottom, I would have been homeless. And so it was always very close to me.
Ruth Mendes was previously living and working in New York.
So in February, my son and I, we were tired of the cold, so we decided to move. And during that time, I got a job interview. I had 2 interviews with the Hilton Hotel, and I didn't get that. And so we decided to move west. The bus broke down in Los Angeles. And my son Googled mission or shelters, and this one was open 24 hours. So I guess God guided us here. The women in our dorm, some of them have worked for a living. They come here for a better life, but it's hard to start fresh.
Homelessness has never been confined to just Skid Row, but more recently it has dramatically increased all over LA County, creating a political battleground.
Services, not sweet. Services, not sweet. Services, not sweet. Services. LAPD.
Amidst this unrest, newcomer politician Nithya Raman won a campaign for city council.
And it makes me so angry because in Los Angeles, our city council has the power to do so much.
The city had invested mostly in putting people who are experiencing homelessness in jail as their primary response, particularly if you looked at spending. And that doesn't end homelessness.
One stopgap measure Nithya supported was Project Room Key. When the pandemic made congregate shelter obviously hazardous, the city started paying hotels to open up their rooms.
The thing about Project Room Key that was revelatory was how much easier it was for people who were living on the streets to accept an offer of shelter if it was a non-congregate shelter, if it was a place where people could close the door. Almost anyone you spoke to, if you offered them a Project Room Key room, they would go indoors.
But of course, the backlash was inevitable.
Protesters say they're concerned about what's going to happen to their neighborhood when the program ends. Concerned some of the homeless will linger in surrounding neighborhoods with nowhere else to go.
We already have issues with drug addiction, mental health. We want something sustainable. This is not sustainable. And what is the exit strategy here at Motel 6? We don't know.
And yet, there still may be ways through this knot. Hal Bastian thinks it could be via the judicial system.
In the 2010s, I would go to New York City. I didn't see encampments. And I asked a deputy mayor in the city of New York, how do you do it? And he said, well, it's really easy. A federal judge makes us do it. We spend over $1 billion a year sheltering people. But guess what? There's a right to shelter in the New York State Constitution. And somebody sued on that issue. And that's how that happened.
With the California and U.S. constitutions lacking such an amendment, Hal Bastian continues to lead lawsuits against the city and county of L.A. to force action on the issues.
A really powerful solution to homelessness is to be able to reconnect people to things that they've been connected with. When people leave their communities, they leave connections, and connections are incredibly stabilizing. And I think a great solution would be to have small, personalized, homeless solutions in every community in Los Angeles.
Cities across the U.S. are facing the same crisis, made even more acute with the availability of cheap synthetic drugs that have intensified mental health issues.
The longer a person experiences homelessness, the harder it is to get them back into stable housing because they get damaged. They get PTSD, they may start medicating, and again, there's a predator on every street corner, and there's a saying in Skid Row, the first one's free. And if you're not ready to buy it, buy the second one's free, but there will be a time when you will do anything to buy what I have to offer.
So what's to be done? Here are 3 strategies that have made a dent in the problem. First, a physical housing unit. Second, case management and other support services. And third, rental assistance. Salt Lake City cut chronic homelessness by 70 to 90% from 2005 to 2015 as an early adopter of the Housing First strategy that's widely followed around the country.
Thank you, Mayor Wilson and Mayor Mendenhall, for all that you and your respective administrations have done to make this affordable housing project possible.
Housing First prioritizes permanent supportive housing as opposed to just providing temporary shelter. Of course, creating enough units is costly and takes time. And yet, Houston cut the number of people sleeping on its streets by half from 2011 to 2020 by marrying a strong reliance on centralized data to the Housing First agenda dubbed the Way Home. Another model is Boston, which participates in the Massachusetts Pay for Success program that has exceeded its goals since starting in 2015 with the Social Innovation Financing Initiative. The state reimburses private seed capital to help ensure housing and service providers face no financial risk. Better to give people help before the whole situation seems helpless.
There's been a lot of gnashing of teeth and wringing of hands about how complicated homelessness is. We've made it complicated. We have decided that it's daunting and unsolvable. Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right.
We plan on getting a house, about a month or so, I'll be out.
What a difference a day makes. Just 8 hours after we aired an I-Team report on the filth found along our freeway, state crews came out and cleaned up the trash on the 101 off-ramp featured in our story last night.